Welcome, everybody, to the Sandman. We'll be talking to you today about the psychology of the Sandman, the origin of dreams, the meaning of nightmares, and maybe what you can do on your end to exert some control and be your own dream vortex. First, let's meet our characters. So to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Isaac Taitz. I'm a clinical psychologist for all mind health and our offshoot all sleep health. I work with individuals on anxiety, depression, OCD, and, of course, insomnia. Geeks of all ages.
So I am Benjamin Taitz. I am a registered psychological associate and doctoral candidate, ABD, all but dissertation, hopefully soon. Stay tuned. I work in clinical and forensic psychology, and I am the co-host of a podcast called Mental Health Quest, the Therapist Office and Beyond, where we try to educate people about mental health topics. What is it? How do you get help? And what does it look like? And so much more. So you can listen to that wherever podcasts are found.
Hello, I'm Justine Mastin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I describe myself as a psychotherapist and so much more. So tune in for the so much more. I co-host a podcast called Starship, Therapise, which is also a book. I have some of those up here. It's so nice to see some of you stayed from the last panel. Thank you. Makes me feel all warm inside, like we're part of a fellowship.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Smith. My Korean name is Yipang Shil, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, mostly based out of Chicago, and I just recently moved to LA. So this is my first LA Comic-Con. I'm super excited to be here with all of y'all. I work as a generalist, so I work with people of all ages. I practice from a neurodivergent, affirming, culturally sensitive manner, trauma-informed care. I work a lot with trauma. And I work a lot with geek therapy as well. And so really excited to be here and to talk to y'all about some nerdy stuff.
Glad to be here. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty. I'm a cognitive scientist philosopher at Illinois State University. I run a little podcast on YouTube, or vodcast on YouTube called Dark Loops Productions. And today, I'm coming to you as the new improved Corinthian. I'm so delighted to be here at this collectors convention. I didn't realize they were actually going to do it. And must I say, y'all have the prettiest eyes. Oh. Yeah, you can clap. I worked hard.
Nobody wants to clap for the Corinthian.
It is kind of sick.
So let's start at the beginning. We're going to start with the origin of nightmares. Then we're going to move on to the nature of them, shifting to understanding dreams, and then shaping them. So at the beginning, let's start with the origin of nightmares, the original victimhood.
So when I saw the Sandman series and they showed us the story of Cain and Abel, and basically the original crime of what's it called, fratricide, right? Fratricide? Fratricide. Like a fraternity. Oh, that's why it's called fraternity, isn't it? I didn't join any fraternities in college, so sorry. I thought it was really interesting because I, as I'm sure a lot of people here, just are very fascinated by true crime and like why do people do those kinds of things? Why I work in forensic psychology. So the story of Cain and Abel is so unique because a lot of the theories of criminality that we understand today don't really apply, but they kind of do. So the nightmare it's a change in circumstance. So Cain and Abel were the first humans born, like they were the first children of the first man kind of person. And Cain kills Abel in my mind because Abel took something from him. Abel took attention from him, maybe, took some kind of part in the world that he wanted to have. And maybe Abel didn't do it consciously, but it was there. Attention was shifted from just Cain to now it's Cain and Abel. And so one of the factors that I see there that's the nightmarish thing is, oh my gosh, my life is not as I thought it was. And something scary here is that, who am I then? And why is this happening to me? And that is a big theme in a lot of like criminality and criminal thinking is there's a big shift, there's a big change, and people are trying to make sense of that change in not so healthy ways. That's what I see as the original nightmare of Cain and Abel and why he committed that crime.
And as your older brother, I just want you to know about feelings. Yeah, from the family therapist, how would we look at this kind of like original nightmare, this original kind of conflict?
Oh, like how would I work with Cain and Abel?
Yeah, why not?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that. All right. Well, I would want to compassionately listen to both brothers because here's the thing about reality, everyone. There are some things around us that we assume are capital T truths, like truths that are true for everyone, but the reality is most truths are lower T truths. The only real capital T truths are like gravity. And so everything else is socially constructed. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So I would listen to Cain and Abel because each of their truths is true for them. And just because they have been told that they need to live a certain way doesn't mean that they have to. And so I would, which one's the murderer?
Cain.
Cain. I just want to be like, hey, Cain, do you want to murder your brother? And he'd be like, I was told I have to. Do you though? What are some other choices you could make? Well, but I feel like I have to. I get that you feel like you have to. What great information we've been given. I'm going to invite you to try something else. What if you wrote your feelings on a Post-it note to your brother? What if you made a doll in the image of your brother and buried that in the yard? Okay, that one's a little darker, but we're trying to think outside the box. Sometimes what we need is to just shake up the system. One of my favorite marriage and family therapists, his name was Carl Whitaker, and I call him the honey badger of marriage and family therapy because he didn't give a wow, nobody remembers the honey badger. Born in the 70s. Okay. But something Carl would do is to shake up a family. He would like throw a frisbee at someone or like give you the bataka sticks to just like beat up on each other in a way that wouldn't be actually harmful. Just to be like, hey, you wanna play out killing your brother? Here, enact it. But don't actually murder anyone. So thank you for asking me how I would work with Cain and Abel. I cede my time.
I think that there's also this other component to it, which is when asking someone, well, what are you accomplishing with that? Because his brother keeps coming back. So, like, what are you really accomplishing by continuously killing him and then him reemerging? Do you just need like a timeout? Y'all live in separate houses. But like what really is the purpose there? And like you said, is there another way to accomplish that? And that's something that perhaps y'all can take away with you as you are thinking about other solution-focused things. There's also the paradoxical intervention, which is to ask him to do it more and to a ridiculous level. Just keep doing it and see if that actually does anything. And usually it would tire someone out to have to exert so much force. But so that's
murdering.
There you go.
it's another option.
This is very dark.
We're talking about nightmares.
Yeah.
And speaking of nightmare, why don't we go to the resident nightmare
Okay.
and extend
I
actually
appreciate that.
over to what you feel is the nature and the purpose of nightmares.
I gotta shift my identity. Can't read and I can't be.
Your teeth
All
aren't
right,
what they
so I'm
used
gonna
to be.
start. So what I find fascinating about dreams, nightmares, and waking life is they're all basically organized in the same system. So in waking life, how many of you have ever been walking down the stairs with your friend talking about that last great episode of Sandman and suddenly you start to fall? Well, why do you fall? Well, because you put your foot out as if the floor, you were at the last step, but you weren't. Right? In other words, you were telling your story, an unconscious story about gravity, and that unconscious story about gravity is always perpetually put into your frontal cortex as anticipation about what's to come next. We call it bias in some contexts, right? In other words, our lived life is constantly thrusting itself forward as a function of context into what should happen next. So actually it's like, oh, that's horrible. Well, no, actually that's why you can be someone, right? Because people who have trouble integrating their spontaneous unconscious memory with the real moment, they'll do it, but they won't take ownership over it. They won't feel like they've done it, and we end up diagnosing them as schizophrenic, right? Because they have thoughts that they don't feel like they own. The reason we feel like we own our thoughts is because our memories are constantly creating the boundary of what we should expect that allows us to divide what happens to us that was caused by us and what happens to us that was caused by something else. And that foundational psychological distinction between self and other is why you get to have a self. All right? So when we do things like go to sleep at night, those systems don't die, they don't go away. What happens is, particularly in what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, it turns out that your emotion activity in your emotional centers is amplified, while activity in your frontal cortex and your planning centers is actually dampened. So what happens is then these highly emotional events happen. There are agents that are causing them, but you don't feel it to be yourself. And there are some who argue that this is the source of dreams of demons, right, and vengeful evil things, is that there's this, the brain is doing something, but it's not, you're not consciously planning it yourself, so things are happening, so it's attributed to some other agent. And there could be the case that because you're so helpless in this state, because your body's not moving, you're right, your body's actually prevented from moving, that brings on terror. And that terror could be the source of what we would call nightmares and demons. In non-REM sleep, which is a different type of sleep, your dreams tend to not be that wild. At the same time, that's where you have these more approach-oriented dreams, and some believe that's where the notion of gods come from, right? So we find gods in approach aspects of our dreams, and we find demons in avoidance aspect of our dreams. So I'm very, very glad to have told you my origin story. And thank you very much. Oh, you can clap. I work hard over here. Oh, so we're going to show you all a little bit of how this interacts with dream and myself. So, oh, Lord.
Do you want to come a little bit closer? Imagine you're at a panel, at a conference, with a bunch of like-minded individuals hungry for the same joy and the same rush that you have, if you can imagine it.
So this is a speech I gave at the collectors convention when dreams showed up and tried to hurt me. We are gladiators and we are soldiers of fortune and we are swashbucklers and heroes, kings of the night. We are the living and that's a triumph, our triumph and our glory.
You disappoint me, Corinthian. You and these humans you inspired and created disappoint me. You were my masterpiece. Or so I thought, a nightmare created to be the darkness and the fear of darkness in every human's heart. A black mirror made to reject everything about itself that humanity will not confront. But look at you. 40 years walking the earth, honing yourself, infecting others with your joy of death. And what have you given them? What have you wrought, Corinthian? Nothing. Just something else for people to be scared of. That's all. You've told them that there are bad people out there, and they've known that all along.
So now what do we do? What do you expect me to do? Just submit quietly? To return to the dream in the sky of their sleeping minds? Never again to know the delights of a sweet eye as it pops between my teeth. Is that it?
No, that's not it.
Then let us fight, Dream Lord. Put on your helm. Let me show you the arts of pain and war I have learned on this earth.
No, Corinthian, we shall not fight, and you shall not go back to the dreaming. It is my fault, I'm afraid. I created you poorly then, as I do uncreate you now.
No! No, I'm melting. I mean, it's awesome. And what I love about what Gaiman did here is that's exactly the case. right? These fears that we have are actually more able to come into our experiences during REM sleep because we feel we can't move. We feel helpless because our body's being suppressed so that we don't move. So these dreams, I mean, Gaiman wants to make them pedagogical, right? He wants to make Corinthian a pedagogical character. I would argue it's an outcome of the things that are in our life, the things that threaten us, and then this is also the source of things that we would call demons, and that's a part I play. That's a part I play.
So we have this one last part about the dream and the dreamer, and how we're building it, how we construct the dream around ourselves. And so we have this concept where we build the world as we go forth. And that aspect doesn't necessarily know to chase you unless you run,
Right,
unless you fear it.
yeah.
I'll go into a little bit later how you can turn on the nightmare and how you can face it back and how you can chase it away. But before that, we need to know a little bit more about what is a dream itself. So for this, I'd actually like to turn to Elizabeth. Can you give us a little bit of information about why we dream, how to make sense of them, what are the mythologies, and particularly how does our old pal Jung have anything to say about this?
So there's a lot of research about dreams that still needs to be done, just to put that out there. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions. If we go back to Freud, it's a lot to do with desire, which is one of our endless, which is partly why desire is having such sibling conflict, if we want to go back to that. But so Jung actually was more thinking of our connectedness and how in many ways a lot of the themes in dreams seem to come up for a lot of people who have never even met each other. And that there seems to be this shared humanity, or not just a singular individual unconscious, but more of a collective unconscious that seems to tie people together, and why certain types of characters or archetypes, figures, seem to emerge in a variety of different cultures. And that seems to connect us as human beings. And so there are still a lot of thoughts on what's going on that we tend to dream. Some believe it's helping us with our emotion regulation. Some believe it's helping us with our memory consolidation because we are taking in so much throughout the day. Physiologically, it's also argued that our brains are actually meant to be at rest. And so we're actually supposed to be at a lower level, but being activated, being awake, learning, working so hard, all of these things actually are more strenuous on our brains and our bodies in a lot of ways. And so one of the thoughts is that this is helping us clean up a lot of the things that we're experiencing in our daily lives. And part of the reason why some people may have reoccurring dreams or reoccurring nightmares is that there's something that's still unprocessed, that we're still working through. And so there's a lot of research still on brainwave activity. There's different types of treatments that can induce different types of brainwaves to help with that as well. And there's also, of course, people are working on things, more psychedelic types of treatments, ketamine treatment, et cetera, to also induce certain states of being and to help people work through a variety of different kinds of traumas, different experiences, EMDR, for instance, as well. So there's a variety of different things that we can do to help work through dreaming. But so some of that answered some of the question, and the main answer is there's still a lot that we don't know, and still a lot that we're on the forefront of discovering.
It's interesting that you bring up EMDR, because there are some theories that the very eye movement desensitization, there's a variety.
Reprocessing.
Thank you. I was always wondering what the R stands for. Can you give us a brief kind of illustration of what that looks like?
Sure. So EMDR initially started with eye movement, and it's actually progressed beyond that. So it's not just eye movement. But the main idea, and there's still also pieces about that we still don't really know. There's also some argument that EMDR is more about exposure than it is about the reprocessing components. But essentially what it is they call it bilateral stimulation, or two sides of your body. And for most people, our language centers are on the left side. There are still some left-handed people whose language centers are on their right side, but for the most part, language centers are actually on the left side. And our memory and our emotion centers tend to be on the right side. And a lot of times, if people have experienced a lot of very moving types of experiences, near-death experiences, or even shock, different types of things, a lot of times people say, I blacked out, I don't even know what happened. I don't even know how to describe it. And sometimes people become speechless even, right, in these smaller moments. But for a lot of people, tying in these two experiences does happen a little bit differently if we are also having stimulation on both sides of the body. So either with sound, with tapping movement. So walking therapies are also very helpful for that. And the eye movement really is about moving the eyes back and forth. Usually we start with something that's a little bit safer. So we do a lot of resourcing or helping people find things and think about things that are a lot more safe and healing to think about, and then we tie that in with the disturbing moments and help bring them back into the safety, and it's constantly reprocessing that. So that does, and for people who may be new to therapy, it doesn't have to be EMDR therapy, but a lot of times people have experiences of very visceral body types of
reactions.
Yes, reactions that happen either during sessions, even after sessions, and even as they're dreaming and processing what occurred throughout the week. They may have some strong emotions and things that come up, just like you might have some soreness after going to the gym after not working out for a while. So yes, that's one way to summarize EMDR.
So the part that's most peculiar about that is the original concept with the eye movement itself is very similar to the kind of rapid eye movement, or REM, that we have. And supposedly this is where some of the mechanism actually works. And so the fact that you're dreaming about it later, that means that you're processing it. It is sinking in. You had a good mental workout.
So I want to say about kind of going into the EMDR a little bit while also talking about the meaning of dreams. So EMDR is primarily used as the gold standard treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of times people with PTSD and other serious traumas, dreams can be very vivid, and they do struggle a lot with nightmares, as well as insomnia. And so to kind of hopefully tie this into the next part, and I'm not spoiling anything, is letting them talk through the nightmare, while also kind of grounding them and reorienting them to the current state that they're in and the current world, and helping them to realize they are safe, because a lot of these nightmares are about the dangerous situation that had occurred, the trauma that had occurred. And so I think that it's a big part of understanding the meaning of the dream is, well, your brain is trying to tell you something that you feel unsafe in your life, not specifically physically, but maybe you don't feel secure in your current identity, and how do you see yourself as a person? Maybe your job is no longer as meaningful to you, or you're struggling in your relationship, but your brain is interpreting that as, I'm not safe. And so I think that could be a really interesting way to look into that.
And so if we don't feel content in our sense of self, if we do not feel that we are the kind of person, how does one reconstruct themselves?
Oh. This is my slide. So let's talk about social constructionism for a minute. Yes. Yes. This is one of my most favorite topics, especially at conventions and with the geek community, because geeks have always been at the forefront of questioning social constructs, and therefore we are at the forefront of social change. Yeah, right? So quick and dirty social constructionism, right? In the same way that dream creates the dreaming and creates all the dreams and nightmares within the dreaming, we as humans living and working and being together over time create rules, roles, boundaries, norms, what it means to live in the society that we live in. And after so long, it seems like these rules are irrefutable truths, the capital T truths. But if we look around, we realize that some of this stuff doesn't need to be a capital T truth, really isn't a capital T truth, and is really freaking problematic, right? Some of that stuff we could look around and see, like the idea of gender. Gender is a social construct. Gender roles are a social construct. What it means to have a body, what that body should look like, what that body should do. These are all little t truths. They're not really real. And so if we look around and we realize that we can question these social constructs, suddenly we can make different choices. Just like Cain and Abel could make a different choice. Maybe there didn't need to be so much murder. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Galt. Oh, there she is. Because dream was out of the dreaming. And just in the same way, some of the old dudes who came up with the rules of our society aren't here anymore. We look around and go, oh man, I don't need to do that stuff anymore. Those guys aren't even here. Why are we holding these rules and values to be our own? And that's what I picture Galt doing, looking around and being like, oh man, dream's not here. I don't need to be here either. Wait, I don't really like being a nightmare. That bums me out. That's not my truth. I'm gonna go try something else. And tries on being a dream and not a nightmare. I was like, this fits. This fits me. I'm a dream, not a nightmare. Sorry.
Matthew, man.
No, he's dreaming.
He's dreaming.
Pining for the fjords.
There we go. Sorry. Sorry, dude. And in the same way that when we question the nature of our reality, the folks who want to hold on to the old guard get uncomfortable. They're like, what do you mean gender is a construct? I'm not cool with that. What do you mean that bodies are good no matter how they look or how they move? I'm not cool with that. Dream comes in and he's like, no, I made you a nightmare, you're a nightmare. And I just love that God was like, I'm not. It doesn't fit for me. I'm sorry, yes, you made me, but that doesn't fit, it's wrong. I'm a dream. If you can't accept that, I guess just, send me into the ether. Yeah. I'd rather be nothing than be someone I'm not. Which, oof, right? I could see some of you feeling that viscerally. And what a moment of growth for Dream to be able to go, you know what? I was wrong. I was wrong. Dreams can change. And I'm big enough to admit that just because I created this world doesn't mean that I have to and can control all aspects of it. And you know what, Galt? If you're a dream, I will make it canonical. Here are your wings. And my invitation to all of you is to question the reality that you were handed and keep speaking truth to power when you are handed with social constructs that don't fit for you. And if the dream entities in your life are uncomfortable, that's okay, because discomfort is how they're going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a growing pain, perhaps.
Oh, I'm going to applaud.
Oh, thank you.
I do want to talk, I love the idea of social constructs, and I think sometimes disservice, sometimes the concept gets disserved because people think it's a cognitive thing.
Right.
and it's a lived thing. So the way you see people being treated, the way the language is used around them, the brain works itself around associating what you're doing with your body with what's happening in the world. And so it ties nicely into the thing I said earlier about your memories constantly projecting into your current moment, anticipating what's going to happen next unconsciously. We don't even know that we're generating what people call bias until it's contradicted, until someone says, but dude, I'm not a nightmare, right? So, when Dream was creating her to be a nightmare, Dream was upset that she wasn't being a nightmare because of Dream's memories, if I can do that. Neil Gaiman has a habit of humanizing his gods, right? And for Dream, what he does by dream learning is so, well, Dream's living in his own dreams as well. Where do they come from? Well, his life with the endless, right? And so all of this wraps up, really nicely. And it's just important people recognize everything you do over and over is going to be part of what you expect. And you don't even know that it's going to be part of your expect. That's why conscious disruption, that's what it's for, is to surprise us and provide other opportunities. Yeah.
Do we have any other thoughts on changing one's self, changing one's nightmare into a dream?
Oh, yeah, I'm just going to do it really quick. Go ahead. So it kind of makes me think of the concept of like rehabilitation and like redemption. People do bad things and society tells them they are bad. Because they hear it so often, it makes it very difficult for them to change because they're like, well, this is just who I am, right? Like, I'm a nightmare, I'm a villain, I'm a bad person. And so for me, the ability to change from nightmare to dream is really rehabilitation. How do you rehabilitate after you've done something horrible? And what does that mean to be rehabilitated? Is you get to create your own dream. What kind of dream do you want to be? While understanding what kind of nightmare you were, like what you did, okay, we understand that, we go through that, we process that, and then we can say, okay, I don't want to be that anymore. I want to be a good person. I want to be helpful. I want to be kind. Okay, well, how do we do that? What choices do we need to make in order to do that? So that's what I thought of.
I had another thought when you were talking.
I have that effect on people.
You do. You have it brings up to the surface. But I work with a lot of folks who've come out of like really structured religions or cultic environments. And suddenly when you have all the options in the world, that can be really scary. Right?
Yep.
Like it was one thing to know that there are two options, right? Dream or nightmare. But if there were a myriad of options, that would be a lot scarier because suddenly Galt would need to really get curious about like what are all the options and how do I feel about them and trying stuff on and making mistakes. And when folks come out of those kind of cultic environments, it's very freeing but also incredibly scary because they used to have a book of rules and now there's no book of rules.
I absolutely love about what you're saying because when you go into a new possible self, you don't have memories of it. And so you don't know what, you're still expecting the old self. And it takes the creation of being that self. By the way, that space is what we call imposter syndrome, or it's called Gandalf the Grey. Right? Because you're making a transition from one set of memories to another. And I have this saying, identity follows circumstance. You don't be someone until you lived being that person for a while, and that's because it has to become what you unconsciously remember about yourself. So when you're making that phase transition into a new self, when you're disrupting the old one, that's an extremely volatile, open space, and that's exactly why a therapist is there. Just like a shaman used to be there. Right?
Yeah,
To
Jung
take
said
you
we'd
in
be
that-
shaman.
Well, to take you in that vulnerable space and take you there and guide you as you find your totem. Absolutely.
I'm going to take this into a little bit of a different realm. Similar. So Dream calls his creations, right? They're kind of like his children. And initially, they need to do what he is telling them to do. And So I love, what we're talking about as far as, questioning the social constructs and questioning, these truths that we're being told. And I will also say that as someone that also works with children, part of play therapy, part of working with adolescents, part of working with young adults is also allowing them to expand and try on different identities and to play and to explore and see what fits for them. And in many ways, that's the stage that Galt was in when we come to meet Galt in the series. And in many ways, that is a growth for the parental figure to recognize, oh, I kind of need to grieve this idea of who my child was going to be, and to also open up for possibilities of who they can become. And in some ways, some of us also are doing that internally, right? As we kind of have these ideas of who we are supposed to be, and also coming to this recognition of who we can be. What are our possibilities? And that self-discovery doesn't necessarily just end at a certain time point. That can continue on for people in a variety of different stages. So we have that chronological age, but we also have a variety of different developmental and emotional ages as well.
Quickly, the idea of found family that you mentioned in the last panel, right? That's going to change someday.
For sure.
Right. In other words, the thing to remember is that it's not that we're seeking no constraint on ourselves, right? We're seeking a whole vision of ourselves. And that is going to be a constraint on how we're going to, that dream we're living in is going to take us some directions and avoid others. And if we don't have that, we're in a bad spot. So sometimes, I only say that because sometimes I hear people saying, we need freedom, i.e. lack of constraint. And Jim Morrison, crash on through to the other side, do peyote without a shaman, right? That's dangerous.
Very dangerous.
That's dangerous stuff. When you use that stuff in indigenous culture, you have a professional there who puts you and your brain in a state of complete openness and therefore complete vulnerability, and they make sure you get through it. So, absolutely.
Another thing I think is important to discuss, because sometimes people get apprehensive with different types of play. So sometimes people are like, oh, those video games are too violent, et cetera, right? And at the same time, much like our dreams, it allows for us to play out certain aspects of things in an environment that is not actually happening in I don't want to say like reality in the sense, because in a lot of ways there are multiple versions of reality, but it's not happening at this interpersonal level where you're actually causing harm to another person. Now, of course, we want to be mindful as to how sometimes people talk to one another during online gaming. That's another thing. But, there are different reasons and purposes to that as well. And, part of becoming, there are a variety of different genres of movies, there are a lot of genres of play, right? And they all have different purposes. And just because they're scary doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. Dream doesn't see his nightmares as necessarily bad. He sees them as helping people come in, confronting something that is scary and being able to reconcile it and move through that so that they can then integrate that into their waking lives. And so there are different aspects to this, and I don't know that we should necessarily pathologize nightmares or their characters necessarily, and determine which one's evil or not, but that there are different aspects to this, and being open to it and the possibilities that they bring allows for a lot more richness.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So it's almost ironic that Galt was a shapeshifter. Their purpose was to change, just as all of our purposes is to grow, not to be static. And so when we find ourselves at a stuck point, it can feel like a nightmare. But there is a way to change it. Who here has had a nightmare ever in their life? Okay, good. And if you didn't raise your hand, you just didn't remember one, which is fine. Probably for the best.
That's so dark.
Nonetheless, there are ways that if you come to such a stuck point, you can change it. So there is a technique out there called imagery rehearsal therapy. And in short, it goes as follows. You write down the nightmare itself, from beginning as much as you can remember all the way to the end, as much as you can recall in every detail, on one sheet of paper. On a separate sheet of paper, you rewrite this new dream. You change it. You start at the beginning, the same section that your brain always seems to show you every night. It always starts the same way, or something similar. So you start down that track, but instead of going all the way down into the scary, terrifying experience you're used to, you rewrite it. You change it. Maybe to neutral, just so it's not too terrifying, more realistic, or even to something positive. And then you take that old nightmare and you destroy it. You tear it to pieces. You can, if safe, you can light it on fire. You can flush it down the toilet if there's enough pieces and enough toilets, etc. Be safe about that too. It's expensive. But then you rehearse the new dream, the version that you want to see, over and over and over again, especially right before bed, especially whenever you have any reminders of that old nightmare. And eventually your brain has rehearsed it so many times, the neurons have connected so many times that that becomes what your dream presents you. Similarly, through cognitive behavioral therapy, you find what patterns you're stuck at. And then you rewrite it. You find something new to do, and you try it, and you practice it over and over again until that is what you end up doing. And if you are able to remember your dreams so easily, and you can work with them so much, you may be able to become aware of them and to become what's called lucid. So a lucid dream is one where you are aware that you are dreaming, that you can tell right now in this moment with all these strange and costume creatures around you, wait a minute, I might be dreaming right now. Who remembers having such a dream before? Fantastic, you're in the right crowd. So for those that are new to this, you may notice that there's going to be some odd inconsistencies in your dreams. The words themselves cannot stay static. The brain cannot hold on to all of that. And so it will appear fuzzy and blurred. Time itself will be strange and warped. Alarm clocks are going to be showing you 9:99:99, and that's not really how my clock normally looks. I have an analog one. That's weird. So these are considered dream signs. And if you wish, you can test what state of consciousness you're in. Some call it a reality check. What reality are you in? Dreaming reality, waking reality. And once you are aware of it, either by covering up the words and looking at them again, or you can switch light switches on and off. The brain cannot repaint this entire room too easily. It's going to take a lot of effort. But you don't always have text in front of you. You don't always have lights around you, but you always have your hands. And so you can pull them, and they stretch like rubber. Or you can kind of poke your finger through them, etc. Essentially, they might appear more pixelated or blurred, but once you recognize, okay, I'm not in waking reality, I'm in dreaming reality, then, as our vortex notices, you have additional agency. You can bring that prefrontal cortex activity, that awareness, into your dream, and you can find more creative uses to solve these problems that may be too terrifying to handle in waking life without a therapist's help. You can even, as you recall, shift the scene, covering up using your hand or doors itself to allow the dream to paint behind it what else could be. So I wanted to impart some of these skills. I wanted to ask for some last thoughts from our dreams and nightmares, and then hopefully a few quick ones from you too. Any last thoughts before we throw it to the audience?
Live the life you want to remember. I mean, that's our last thought, that we're going to say goodbye.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. That was my last thought.
So I just want to say that nightmares are scary, but there's a purpose behind them, as we've discussed. And if we can learn to talk to them, then they're not going to be as scary anymore. And so whatever scares you in life doesn't have to. You just need to kind of understand it a little bit better, and kind of see from its perspective and let it, be at your side and not in front of you.
I just want to say how fun this was. and how much we appreciate all of y'all being here, and we welcome all questions.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely.
First question.
Is Gaiman really this smart?
I'd like to.
Yes.
Can I comment on that? Gaiman doesn't have to be consciously that smart for this to happen. That's serious, because the stories aren't coming from his thoughts. His thought, basically when you're writing, your consciousness is there to almost keep everything else out, so that the unconscious stuff that you know can just pour out onto the page. Anybody who writes, I guarantee you sit there and where the hell did those 3 pages come from? I wrote that, that's awesome. So he doesn't have to consciously be what we would call that way. He's just great at letting the stories come out of him.
Yeah, I would agree. The collective unconscious is just sitting there. And Joseph Campbell talked about like dipping into the collective unconscious, which I like to call Joseph Campbell's soup. And some people are just able to like really dip the spoon into Joseph Campbell's soup and come back with gold.
One of my favorite quotes that I like to use from Gaiman in my therapy sessions is the concept of the muse. Later on in this latest kind of extra episode that was given to us, we see Calliope. And this concept of the muses originally was, that there's some being that you kind of reach out to and they will come to you. And the genius was originally one of these muses. And so the original thinkers would, ask and beseech for that knowledge. And so Gaiman told his audiences who asked them, how does he make such great works, is you set aside a time each day and you write. Specifically for writing, you put yourself in the location. You set the expectation and you set the time and you try. What a psychologist might call a behavioral experiment. But the more you give yourself a chance to try, the more likely you're going to stumble across something. So whether or not Neil himself is the genius that we are all expecting and projecting onto him, perhaps just by setting aside that time, this knowledge was able to come through.
Can I get brilliant, and can I if you're writing, it's work. And this is a myth that we just don't understand. I'm sorry, I'm a professor. Writing good work doesn't mean just fulfilling the 10-page assignment. Good work means getting something on the page so that destructive aspects of your brain can break what you've written down, and you can reorganize it. And then if you've ever written a long piece, you don't write it well until you remember it, till it's all in your head. And you know how page 3 is related to page 10. But you can't get there consciously, in the sense that you get there work-wise and letting it become part of how you remember the story. And then having the skill to edit yourself. If you can't edit yourself, which means that's not good, and you develop that skill by regurgitate, rewrite, destroy, create, destroy, and then you're like, damn, how did I do that? Well, it took 30 hours, but I did it. Yeah.
So you guys kind of talked a lot about the Corinthian on one end of the spectrum and then golf on the other. Where do you think Fiddler's Green falls into that determinism and...
I just love Fiddler's Green. We're getting time.
Did she say 5 minutes?
She gave us the tea.
So we'll answer this one and then we'll do a photo shoot.
Okay, well, they have been going to 55. I'm
Okay.
just saying.
All right.
Okay, all right.
The
So
dream does
we're
not end here.
rejecting that social construct.
So you were gushing over Fiddler's Green.
I find that character so delightful. And that moment when when she says, "You sound British," and he says, "Thank you." I just loved that. And I don't have a good answer to your question, just that I found him an absolute delight. And it felt like, if you were here for the last panel, we were talking about like finding a core sense of self inside of you. And to me, Fiddler's Green is like capital S self energy. That's what that feels like. He knows who he is. He owns it. When he is found out, he's like, I have to go back because this is, that's my home and my dad is back. and I'm going to go and tell my dad what happened, and I'm going to deal with the consequences, and that's, that's just what it, and whatever happens, happens.
And he is going to protect it if he has to.
Yeah.
So I love that Neil Gaiman didn't let him just be gushy. No, things go bad, I'm there, right? He pulls out his umbrella, and he's ready. So I appreciate that completeness, right? That was great.
Yes.
Question about social constructs. How did they get started in the first place? Were they conscious creations, or were they more unconscious? They just decided to make rules what felt right.
Can I just add one thing to that before you
Oh,
go? I'm sorry.
sure, yeah.
So I actually read a book about this that I thought was really interesting. I don't know if it is the truth, because humans have been around for a long time and things change, truth changes. But it was posited, it was believed that these social constructs were an evolutionarily adapted trait to help us to survive in a very dangerous world where we were not the apex predators. And so by having these rules and beliefs and norms, we could keep ourselves safe. And that's why when people break the rules, break the norms, then it's such a big deal, because you just endangered everybody. Did I steal your thunder?
No,
Did I give you more thunder?
you could never steal my thunder. I have so much. I'm like Thor.
She said that was such a positive.
We've got enough thunder for one more minute, so thunder away.
Some of this is like in our ancient brain, right? Like biologically, we're hardwired for community. And we're hardwired to live in tribes and be together. And that's why we're so afraid of embarrassing ourselves or not fitting in, because this ancient part of our brain is like, if the tribe doesn't love you, you will be thrown out to the wolves, you will starve, you will be eaten. And like that terror is really real. And that's why, we're like, you know what? I think I will wear a tie.
So, perfect transition. Elizabeth, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we wake up from this dream?
I was going to go back to your question about how Fiddler's Green fits on the spectrum, and I would say that all three are very much owning their identities, and they're doing it in a way that sometimes children do, sometimes adults do, right? And it's a thing that happens that sometimes upsets people. And sometimes some people go into it in a way where it does cause more harm, and so they have to be reprimanded in that way. But all three of them very, very much own their identities and stand up and say, no, this is who I am. And they very much accept Corinthian, not really wanting to accept the consequences thereof.
They don't try to bring the Corinthian back and force him to be what he used to be. They don't try to force Galt to be the nightmare that she originally was. And all things considered, they accept Fiddler's Green for coming back and exploring who he is, and coming back and deciding to maintain as the dream he is. And so tonight when you go to sleep, I hope that you have a dream of Fiddler's Green. I hope you get to fly as much as you wish and try some dream food. It tastes as good as you imagine to be, and you as an audience have been a dream. Thank you very much.
Can we tell the people where to find us?
Yes, please. From the bottom to the top, let's tell everyone how they found us, and anyone who wishes to join us in a group photo afterwards, please do.
So you can find me on Facebook and Twitter at MHQ Podcast, which is my podcast, Mental Health Quest, and you can listen to that wherever podcasts are found.
You can find me at LIZZY, Lizzie, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, so Lizzie NS, on Twitter or Instagram. It's not anything professional or fancy, just my regular Instagram.
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom. You can also pick up Starship Therapise using therapeutic fan fiction to rewrite your life wherever books are sold, and I have a few here. Also, if you are a health professional of any sort, I have a new book coming out with my co-author called The Grieving Therapist, Caring for Yourself and Your Clients When It Feels Like the End of the World. 2 podcasts, Starship Therapise and Dark Side of the Mat, which is all about yoga cults. Thanks.
Fantastic. As I said earlier, you can find me on YouTube at Dark Loops Productions. And as a final comment, ants have social contracts, and we call them pheromone gradients. And if you want to know more later, I'll talk to you about it.
And everyone, I've been Dr. Isaac Taitz of All Mind Health and All Sleep Health. You can find me online at All Mind Health for most of the socials. You can follow the QR code to our website or find a card up here. And if you will it, it is no dream. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming with us today.
Thank you.